Hello, and welcome to another edition of Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Rebush. With me, as always, is Phil McKenzie. And, Phil, first of all, I have one very important thing I would like to say, which is... But that can wait for later, because, of course, that snort pertains to the co-main event of the main topic of our episode today, which is UFC 273, two title fights, one of which firmly established its victor as the pound-for-pound best fighter in the world, as if he didn't already have, in my opinion, the best claim to that slot. The other of which just absolutely rocketed a former pound-for-pound contender down to probably the bottom 100 or so. Great results, great fights, very compelling pay-per-view, pretty much from top to bottom. I really had a great time watching this entire card. And, boy, I can't wait to talk about the co-main event, but we are going to start off today. Discussing the main event, which of course was a featherweight title fight between Alexander Volkanovski and Chan Sung Jung. After that, Sterling versus Jan 2. And after that, basically everything else of interest on the card, or at least everything else we can get to, because as I said, it was a very interesting card. But certainly the fight of the year contender between Khamzat Chimaev and Gilbert Burns far exceeded expectations, and thank Christ gave us new things to talk about regarding Khamzat Chimaev, while still giving him the chance to remain one of the most impressive, if not the most impressive, untitled fighters in the entire welterweight division. Mackenzie Dern versus Tisha Torres, we're going to try to get to as well, and then we'll see what else we have time for. We'll have to mention Julio Arce, who, despite missing weight and being saddled with the curtain jerker slot on this card, I think turned in one of the best performances of his career in a really great fight. Also, on the prelims, we're going to have to mention Anthony Hernandez versus Josh Fremd, which was the middleweight fight to end all middleweight fights, fought at the pace of a flyweight bout, an absolutely surprising action battle between two unranked middleweights. Really, really good. So, main event, Phil. Volkanovski, Chan Sung Jung. No dispute about how this one was going. In fact, I have one thing to say, which I figure I should say right at the top, because it may in fact be my last chance to ever say it. Herb Dean is a hero.
Yeah.
Herb Dean turned in one of the best stoppages I have ever seen in not just a UFC title fight, in any UFC fight. He turned in a perfect mercy stoppage, for a fighter who, in Chan Sung Jung, who was absolutely tough enough to hang around way longer than he should have. And in fact, by the time of the stoppage already had started to do so. But Herb Dean stopped the title fight on the feet at the first sign of trouble after Chan Sung Jung's best and worst round of the fight so far. So I really just want to praise Herb Dean for saving Chan Sung Jung any further unnecessary punishment when it was obvious his corner was not going to step in to do their job. I get very few chances to praise that man, but he really absolutely did a great job officiating this fight.
Yep. And it didn't end up being really much of a fight, did it? Ended up kind of being an execution.
It really was. It was brutal, and it looked for Volkanovski like a more violent version of a fight like the one Julio Arce had with Daniel Santos on the undercard, or like Robert Whittaker versus Kelvin Gastelum. Just like an exhibition of boxing skill, essentially. But with like extremely dire consequences, because Volkanovski wasn't just picking Korean Zombie apart. He was, in fact, hurting him repeatedly with lightning fast, quick, clean punches, and really by far, I think, his best boxing performance yet.
Yeah. one thing that I thought kind of, even before we went into this fight, the one thing that was confusing me, and I don't want to mention the co-main event too early again, but is the fact that there were a bunch of people before this fight saying, I don't know why Volkanovski is more of a favorite over Zombie than Jan is over Aljo. Like, that just seemed weird to me. Because, I mean, I understand the basic premise of it, of that kind of thinking, which is that, like, Zombie is a big, powerful guy who might necessarily, like, pick up a single random finish out of nowhere. So maybe he's, if you're thinking, like, either one's just going to have to get super lucky to win this fight. Seemed to be the general premise. But it was just the idea that, like, Zombie is... Aljo and Jan was a fight between two people who are both elites in the prime of their careers, and Zombie just isn't that.
Yeah.
I don't think he's in the prime of his career, and he's, demonstrably he's not... If you look at the sort of tiers of the featherweight division, he's very clearly in, at least the third tier.
Sure.
Wasn't, there's the Volkanovski tier, and then there's below that, there's Ortega, and, I guess maybe Yair Rodriguez. And,
sure.
But Zombie is very clearly like a step below that.
Yeah, Zombie, Ige, Emmett, these guys.
Yeah, these kind of guys. And yeah, so in one way, it wasn't necessarily surprising. But yeah, I think the key point that you hit was, like, this wasn't just a bad matchup or a or just someone being worse than someone else, although it was those things. It was like really just another, like, leap forward for Volkanovski.
Yeah. Who was, again, in my book, already the best fighter in the sport.
Yep.
And he achieved another level in a skill set where he has always been impressive, but this was like, even though his well-known kicks did a lot of work, just with feints and hands.
Yep.
He delivered a masterclass here.
Counterpunching, fighting off the back and the front foot.
Yep.
Just, like, delivering power consistently. I did find it. Did you find yourself worried, like, right at the, or, like, at least sort of, I don't know, like, concerned for him right at the beginning of the fight? Because I thought he seemed so dialed in that he was he was very close to getting clipped up at the very beginning of the fight. Like, I was like, oh, Volkanovski's really overstaying his welcome in these exchanges. But then, quickly, it just seemed that Zombie just could not reach him. He dialed into that so quickly. Mm-hmm. I think right at the beginning. Let me see if I can find one of the exchanges I'm thinking about.
Mm-hmm.
He just basically gets into a, like, swinging exchange with Zombie, like, right off the bat, and gets almost sort of clipped by a left hook on the exit, and that was sort of one of the last times that Zombie really came even close to landing anything. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, sort of alluded to before, he had some moments in round 3. I mean, I thought, to his credit, like, Zombie did a remarkable job of trying everything he could to get into this fight. After an abysmal start. But of course, that third round ended with his worst moment of the entire fight. Okay, yeah, I see the exchange you're talking about. It's just about 4 minutes, or a minute into the first round.
Yep.
Zombie sort of charges in. Volkanovski fires back, kind of rolls under, returns a left hook, and then almost takes one. Yeah, I didn't find myself particularly worried, actually, at that point. Just because Volkanovski, again, as a boxer in this match, every element of boxing was so on point. Not just his punching, not just his combinations, not just his feints, but just his positioning and distance was on point. So even in an exchange like that one, we see him, near the fence, but we also see him drawing back and moving off to this inside angle, even as Korean Zombie is firing that. It's actually a right hook. And yeah, it comes close, but then we look at the position they end up in, and it's Korean Zombie who's vulnerable. Whereas even if Volkanovski had taken that punch clean, he's in a pretty good position to sort of ride the force of it. All these little movements, these little sort of penetrating movements that he made to just pierce Korean Zombie's stance. I guess this is a prime opportunity to talk about Volkanovski's use of the jab, because frequently, almost always in fact, that was the weapon that got him into those positions where he could then deliver combinations. I thought the way he played off his jab was amazing. I mean, we already know Korean Zombie is quite susceptible to a mobile jabbing attack. We watched Brian Ortega pick him apart with that very game plan. We watched a lot of moments of success from Dan Ige using similar tactics. But Volkanovski really had every kind of jab, every follow-up off the jab that you could possibly want. Like I said, he used the jab to get around Zombie's front foot. Depending on what range he ended up in, how Zombie reacted to that movement, sometimes that step he would step into the angle with the jab and it would miss. And then with zero hesitation, he would just throw another jab. He's in a position for it to land clean. The miss has given him, I mean, this is like Whittaker Gastelum. This fight was an exhibition in how to use your jab to gather information and then immediately capitalize on the data you've gathered. So when he would step in on that angle and the jab wouldn't quite land, he knew that the next move was to just step in a little further and land the jab. He gathered that information from the tactile feedback of whether or not his punch connected cleanly. When it did connect cleanly, he would often follow up immediately with a right hand. Other times, he would hesitate on the right hand. Really did a great job of using the jab to force Zombie to react, letting his reaction unfold, and then lining him up with the follow-up shot. Because again, the jab had already gotten him to such a strong angle that he didn't have to pounce right away. And Zombie was anticipating that 1-2. And it was just like a 1-2 with a beat between to let Zombie have this sort of desperate rote attempt to get out of the way and then catch him after that was done. That was fantastic.
Treating jabs to keep himself safe. We've said that, you know, the problem, one of the issues might be that Zombie could chase him down and flurry punches at him. Yep. But to be honest, he was so proactive with his counterpunching that immediately became just incredibly dangerous. Yep. He often just found himself running straight into the jab as Volkanovski moved out of the pocket. Yep.
It would be one step back. Zombie would have that reaction we expected, time to eat up that space, and he would just run into the jab. Other times, Volkanovski would take a couple steps back and Zombie would lurch forward and it would be a left hook counter that greeted him as he wound up on his right hand. And then Volkanovski also did a great job, as you said before, fighting off the back foot. Like, it was such a flexible performance. He didn't have to be pressuring and absolutely commanding the initiative at all times. There were moments when Zombie felt pressured to apply pressure, if that makes sense. He knew he had to make something happen, and Volkanovski knew that too. He knew, okay, I've put him in a position where he has to do something. I'm going to hang back a bit and use that against him. And that resulted in the first knockdown of the fight. He was skirting along the cage, had Zombie chasing him, and was just at the right distance where, if Zombie were to commit to a punch, it would be too far for it to land before Volkanovski could see it. Zombie did commit, tried a jab, should be a relatively safe attack, but from too far away. And Volkanovski just cross-counter, left hook, dropped him. Just a beautiful use of distance as a weapon in and of itself, forcing Korean Zombie It's like how you use the back foot to seize the initiative. And you've already piled up points, and now Korean Zombie has to make a risky move, and you know the range, you know the distance, you're making him come after you, and now you can punish him for it. Exceptional.
I mean, I remembered seeing the tail of the tape beforehand, and it was like, Korean Zombie has an inch of height and half an inch of reach. I'm just like, no, he doesn't. Come on.
You thought he had to have more than that?
Yeah, there is no way that Chan Sung-jung is an inch taller than Alexander Volkanovski. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But yeah, on that note, it's just, incredible performance of out jabbing and out, talk about people controlling the distance in MMA. Almost everyone who really does so very well is has just the advantage of just being tall and lanky, and
right.
When we talk about these masterclass performances, Whittaker can jab and screw up Kelvin Gastelum in part because he's got such a sort of safety blanket to do it from. The fact that Volkanovski is making people look like they have a reach disadvantage,
right.
even when they are obviously much taller and bigger than him, and that is almost unique, I think, in MMA. I cannot think of many other fighters who have done that. Even Jose Aldo, I think, has up against, say, Moicano. A lot of it was in behind the jab and then just pummel Moicano before he can respond. This was making Zombie miss his jabs and countering with his own jabs simply because his positioning was superior.
Yeah. Occasionally, also at that long range, he would actually more than occasionally he countered the jab with the inside low kick. Really nice maneuver.
I did find myself wondering whether Zombie wasn't jabbing all that much because he had prepared for the inside low kick, and he didn't want to jab too much and get his leg taken out.
Yeah, it still happened about half the time he threw the jab.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a possibility. Yeah, maybe a performance like Aldo versus Florian is a fight where it feels like the shorter guy just has a tremendous reach advantage despite the shorter frame.
Yep. Yeah, that's a good chat, I think.
But yeah, man, just every single element of Volkanovski's game and then some. The feints, again, using sometimes he would miss the jab to get into range. Sometimes he knew the distance he wanted and he would feint the jab to get closer and then fire. Again, all these offbeat 1-2s were super effective. He would sort of reminded me of Gaethje Ferguson, where he would sort of get the first touch in, reposition his feet, and take a little moment to line up the follow-up shot. And that moment of hesitation just made it all that much harder for Zombie, who was already struggling to keep up defensively, to figure out what was going to happen next. And even when it was almost always the right hand next, he just couldn't time it. He would react too soon, or he would not react at all. And meanwhile, Volkanovski is using every single feint, every offensive threat, every strike to get his feet into a better position where he is both, physically closer to his target, but also just feels further and further out of Korean Zombie's sights. Yeah, it's amazing how he can feel like the longer fighter while even being within what should be the circle of Korean Zombie's range, but just not in the right position to actually get hit cleanly.
Yeah. He's just as you said, a remarkably diverse striker.
Incredible.
In that, I mean, it must be exhausting. Just mentally exhausting to keep all those options in his head all the time.
And yet,
he's not building off a single strike most of the time. He's So it's not like he's building out from a singular jab and then going, okay, next time we build out from the jab and we circle to the right hand. I mean, he is to an extent.
Yeah.
But it's the fact that the fact that he would be ready to counter with right hands and inside low kicks pretty much the entire time. He never fell into any kind of rut throughout the entire performance. No. I mean, it really was just a masterclass.
He's somehow keeping track of like 5 different flow charts.
Yep.
At once. He is just an incredible fucking tactician. And also, like, on top of, again, if there are 2 kinds of thinking, and the difficulty in being a truly all-terrain fighter is that most people tend towards one or the other, Volkanovski is the best all-terrain fighter in the sport. Because he is a tremendous tactician, always on top of what are the current threats in the position I'm in at this very moment, what new positions can I go to, what new options does that give me, and what new risks does that pose for me. Always on top of these kinds of things, but also seems to have an extremely clear idea at every moment of like where he is in the larger story of the fight, what he can afford to do, what sort of strategic pressure is on the opponent, whether that is the literal pressure of him walking them down and making them react to him, or that feeling I mentioned of Korean Zombie having the front foot, but knowing that he like has to use it more aggressively than is actually good for him. Yeah, he's astounding, man. And it's almost, I mean, one shame of the co-main event is that, as we will ourselves do, everyone's talking about the scoring rather than the sort of technical things that happened in the fight. The other misfortune of that result and the scorecards is that no one seems to be talking about Volkanovski when he's unbelievable. I saw somebody say, by the way, since we're about to get to the subject of people's secret biases, of which I have none. So I saw somebody say Volkanovski is starting to become like Demetrius Johnson. He's so boring, which baffled me, because I don't know how you could find this fight boring. It was a masterful display and full of action and violence.
I mean, they have some similarities in that they both actually became more violent over time,
right,
as they were champions.
Right. I think it...
Yeah, I mean, so I was saying when I was looking at the BT Sport app before we started the episode, because I was looking for the replays, there are 2 full fight replays up on the BT Sport app, and they are John Sterling and Burns Chimaev.
Yeah.
This one is not there at all.
Which I guess in the sense that it wasn't much of a fight, but like, man, this is one of the most dominant championship performances ever.
And they always have the main event.
Yeah.
They have Curtis Blades versus Chris Daukaus up there.
Well, you want to talk about boxing masterclasses. Curtis Blades genuinely turning in the best boxing performance of his career so far is, 1/100th of what Volkanovski did at basically every moment of this fight. And yeah, I think the comparison to Demetrius Johnson there really just reveals a particularly disgusting bias, which is a hatred of short people.
Yeah.
He's just a stocky little wide-backed tank. Don't hold that against him. He's amazing.
On that note, I think, everyone shouts at me if I don't finish it, but I might actually be writing an article.
Yeah.
Which I've had for a while on the back burner. I'll try and finish it. Which will be something like 10 reasons why Alexander Volkanovski is MMA's pound for pound number 1. Yes, I will be making a listicle about one of the worst possible things to write about.
Wow, a listicle about lists. Fight rankings.
Yeah.
You disgust me.
Yeah.
I can't wait to read it.
It's gonna have lots of things that will upset people in it.
Can you give us a teaser?
Just lost the ability to. just lost the ability to write good, so I think I'm just going to make sort of snarky jokes about things which will only entertain me.
No, you're a great writer. Phil, don't sell yourself short. Can you give us a teaser? What's one of the inflammatory things you'll say in this abomination of the craft of writing?
I'm just going to suggest like whether the Sopranos is the number 2 or the number 3 HBO show of all time.
Oh no. Go on. What's above it? The Wire and Deadwood?
Yeah. Or like, does Chernobyl also go in there? You know, these are the questions that people have to ask. Maybe it's number 4. Who knows? Yeah, I'm trying to get in time to like mock Giga Chikadze and do all the other and short people in general.
Good. Not the short people thing.
Yeah.
I've aligned myself with the camp of pretending to be disgusted by that. So actually, I'm mad at you. But
excellent.
Yeah, unbelievable, incredible, and just once again, because I'll never say it again. Well done, Herb Dean. I really, man, like. I was just pleading. I knew it wouldn't happen. I think I even said as much. I was like, Korean Zombie's Corner is not going to stop this. Of course, King Korean Zombie is not going to quit. I really he had that third round and I was like, okay, maybe he can make something happen. You know, he was making some adjustments. He was using his head movement well. He was trying to anticipate the jab with limited success, but he was pressing forward, being aggressive with his defense. And just trying to get into the right range where he could slip enough shots that he would finally be able to let go a punch that landed. He had some good moments. And then, of course, that round ended with his worst moment of the fight. I think the third knockdown where he ate like an inside right hand, inside his left hook. And then just a brutally short left hook, every bit as nasty as the one that, Mike Malott dropped Mickey Gall with in the first main prelim fight. Korean Zombie being Korean Zombie took it and like staggered back, and then Volkanovski just like tears in after him, with like a 1-1-2, and he just like the way Korean Zombie is reacting to these shots, he's clearly hurt. He's barely getting out of the way. Another like hook right hand, and he drops him. And at that moment, I was like, I do not want to see any more of this. You know, any amount of success or adjustment Korean Zombie shows, it's just not worth it. And
yeah, I mean, it was like the Holloway Ortega and Holloway Volkanovski fights. Is that, you know, Volkanovski was absolutely tearing Ortega to pieces, and then Ortega has this sudden comeback moment, and people are like, well, maybe he would have had that if, you know, they hadn't stopped his Holloway fight. I'm like, I don't care.
Yeah. Not worth it.
Like, you know, if referees stopped fights all the time, we wouldn't get comebacks like Pat Barry against, like Chet Congo against Pat Barry. I was like, good, I don't care.
Who cares?
That fight probably should have been stopped.
Yeah.
It's just a simple, like, maybe we wouldn't have got Frankie Edgar, Gray Maynard, or something like that if people stopped fights earlier. I'm willing to take that. I'm willing to take that cost in order for people not to be like just battered around the cage for round after round.
So well done, Herb Dean. I'm very, very proud of you. I won't take back all the times that I've mocked you because you deserved it, but you saved Korean Zombie at, honestly, like, if the end of the third round wasn't a stoppage, which it easily could have been, you gave him one last chance, a championship fight chance. You saw him just get hurt, and you stopped it. That is as close to perfect as I can ask for from an MMA ref. Very well done. All right. Well, let's take a break then, and let's have some fun after this break. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show.
We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. The co-main event of UFC 273 was of about 17 absolutely hilarious possible realities. This was certainly one of them. Aljamain Sterling. We knew he could have some moments. We knew that he had moments last time. We outraged a couple of Petr Yan fans by insisting that Aljamain Sterling was up to a point quite competitive, even though, of course, like everyone else on the face of the planet other than Aljamain Sterling himself and his mother, presumably, we expected that the months of abuse, the just chaotic downward spiral that was his performance in the first fight, all of this would very likely result in an Aljamain Sterling entering the cage with the sort of demeanor of like a battered housewife, just like somebody who just is just dreading that moment when everything turns and it goes to shit. And I am so happy to say, Phil, that we completely underrated the heart, determination, and discipline of Aljamain Sterling. And really, like, despite how the first fight went, despite finding it very easy to like project myself into the role Aljamain Sterling had to play these last 9 months or however long it's been. Despite that, I now feel in hindsight as if I should have known better, because I know that Aljamain Sterling is a tough motherfucker. I know that Aljamain Sterling can stick to a game plan, as he did against Pedro Munoz, even when things start to go haywire. That he can really remain disciplined and stick to his guns. And that really, that first fight against Petr Yan was more of an outlier than it was any kind of standard for how his career has gone up to this point. And it was me, being afraid of Petr Yan and assuming that Aljamain Sterling must be afraid of him too. And I gotta say, he wasn't. He wasn't afraid at all. He fought not even the fight I expected, and still, you have to say, a brilliant fight. He did a fantastic job of taking a different approach, using his advantages, and I'll say one last thing before I hand it over to you. Zane and I on the Vivisection last week, Zane brought up something I said a while back, which is that sometimes a problem with Serra Longo fighters is that their approach to game planning, it seems to have involved no game plan, if there's ever, seems to have any adjustment beyond doing the game plan harder. You kind of come in with an idea of how the fight's supposed to go, and this worked against Sterling in the first fight. He clearly came in thinking, I have to out-grapple Yan, and if that doesn't work, I'm done. And it didn't work, and then he was done, and increasingly done as it went on. But here, I think
he was in the first fight, he was clearly just like, I have to overwhelm him.
Right.
Cannot let him do anything.
I can't let him do anything. And then nothing was working after a certain point. I think that's more accurate. But I think we see how that can absolutely be a strength for a fighter like Sterling, who, again, as I should have known, can be tremendously disciplined and courageous. Which is that you come into a fight knowing what your advantages are and just refusing to stop pressing them. No matter what happens, you just keep looking to make your advantages a reality in the fight. And it resulted in a super gutsy, well-executed game plan. Was it a perfect performance? No, it's Petr fucking Yan. But it was the right game plan, and it worked. And, yeah. Amazing.
Yeah, I guess the main thing we can take away from it is that at least we didn't underestimate Aljo as much as many other people did.
That's true.
I mean, man, this was really the fight of, feeling a great disturbance in the force, as though a million monsters suddenly cried out at once and were silenced. Yeah, and I think too many people got into and thank God, like we can actually finally talk once more against about Piotr Jan as like an incredibly good fighter and undeniably one of the best in the sport, and not as like an immortal force of nature,
right?
Who everything you do is simply slipping into his game plan or in some bizarre way.
Yeah,
like. I remember hearing people saying that, like, actually Aljamain Sterling didn't do anything in the first fight, and all if he was throwing was like empty volume, like empty body punches and empty flying knees, and it was just weird. Like, I mean, we might have been at risk of doing this with Volkanovski in the Korean zombie fight just now, but like
we'll get to temper that when he rematches Max Holloway again. We'll have realistic limitations of Volkanovski to seriously explore then. But yeah.
Like, don't mythologize people.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, this was a fight where I think you could say beforehand and you could say afterwards that Sterling had an incredibly narrow route to victory to walk. And, like, he did it. I think that's true before and afterwards. I think it's just a credit to his execution, a credit to how tough, a credit to it's still a credit to how tough Peter Yan is as an opponent.
Mm-hmm.
He had to be. All right, give me 1 sec, Connor. I'm just gonna have to go on mute.
Oh, you're good.
I'm being interrupted here.
I could just cut this out, or I could use it as an opportunity to just lambast Phil for I don't know, what today. He made what he referred to as a chili con carne with baked beans. What about that? He put cilantro in it, but he called it coriander? Like, are you fucking kidding me? What else? Oh, he's a good man who's kind to his family and loved ones. No, that doesn't work. Oh, he's British. That's
chili with baked beans.
You heard that, huh?
Yeah.
So anyway,
all your slanderous accusations. I made it with kidney beans, spam, just like how it's meant to be made.
That's right.
Sorry. So what was I saying? Oh yeah, essentially, Sterling had an incredibly narrow path to victory, and he executed it. A lot of that would focus on him being able to either finish Yan or be able to backpack him for long periods of the fight. He was able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it just involved him having game plans to survive, and that is, I think, certainly one of the areas in which there was probably room for improvement, because Sterling's late game approaches against Yan really don't look good.
No.
He does not seem to have a plan B apart from just spam takedowns until the fight's over.
Again, I think this is a thing common to most Serra-Longo fighters, is that there's not really ever a stage 2 to the game plan.
Yeah, I mean there was kind of he had his first round and then his second. His first round was demonstrably different to 2 and 3.
Right.
But
there were 2 steps. There was no stage 3.
After that, it was just shoot takedowns. Don't stand up for a minute with this guy. But from the first 2, executed completely flawlessly. And yeah, it allows you to remember that yes, fighters are human. They can make mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
Once again, proves the old thing of the old chestnut false of people reading way too much into pre-fight psychology and specifically, I remember like weigh-ins, like Sterling was in tears during his weigh-in. Like it's because I've been away from the sport for so long, and I've been having surgery. For just like, oh, he's terrified of Jan. Jan is going to kill him.
Seems he was, in fact, genuinely just delighted to be back. He was excited.
So something that we mentioned before we started recording, if either of these two looked shook, like looked out of sorts, it was 100% POC Jan.
Absolutely agreed. Yeah, I think we seriously underestimated the extent to which Sterling, I mean, credit to Sterling, during this entire ridiculous, insufferable lead up, he has been just snapping back at Jan at every opportunity and like gloating over Jan's error. Gloating as if, which I'm confident he felt he did, he deserved to be champion. And Jan didn't, and he was an idiot who had thrown it away. And I think we seriously, we're not innocent in this, underestimated the extent to which he was in Jan's head. Because I think you can say pretty confidently, Jan was not the focused fighter that we're used to. He fought mad. And then that anger, after Sterling's success started to mount up, that anger, like dissolved into clear frustration. The look on Jan's face, throughout round 2 was only, overshadowed by the look on his face when the same thing started to happen again in round 3.
The Sterling, like,
the grin.
Sterling grin when he took the back the second time was wondrous to behold.
Yeah. Cause me sitting on my couch watching, I was like, I'm watching with my girlfriend and of course she doesn't give a shit, but, I'm like, I was clapping and exclaiming when he got that takedown in round 3. And that's round 3. And right as I said that, Sterling grins, just confirming that he's thinking the exact same thing. Like, you know what? I think I just got this shit in the bag. Delightful. Yeah. Just an evil grin as he backpacks Petr Yan for the second time. And Jan was clearly frustrated. And, as a result, I mean, first of all, I think he made more mistakes early. They are, to justify some of the, things we've critiqued him for in the past. They were mistakes that I think are perfectly in line with things that even Jan at his best does anyway. Overthrowing, leaping forward, getting to that point as he did in the Jimmy Rivera fight where he's like, oh, I have to chase this guy down. I'm just going to throw 3 huge punches and fly forward. And, he like missed big trying that several times. And, his attitude towards an opponent who insists on maintaining distance, that he's just going to commit to a strike, I think also resulted in at least one of those takedowns. Because, he kept thinking Sterling was maintaining a pretty long distance. He kept thinking he had to reach him with kicks and that he could basically just get free body kicks off on him. And, in fact, it may have been both of those takedowns were Sterling converting a caught kick into a back take.
I think the other one was, Sterling actually kind of started, he actually had a really nice sequence of just sort of reminiscent of the early going in the last fight where he just kept Jan shelled up with doing lots of different stuff. Then, got Jan to swing back at him and just turned the corner and then ran him into the cage. So it was much more of a sort of, I don't think it was a kick level change to the third round takedown. Okay.
Actually, the first one wasn't either. I just watched it right now. It was just a, punch into like a snatch single. And then he tried to, like knee pick finish with the other arm on the shoulder. And Jan tried to escape by turning and gave up his back. But yeah, the frustration I think had to have played a part in Jan, really just not being the adjuster that he can be at his best.
The most shocking part of it is, it's not necessarily that he was mad and he went after Sterling late. I think it was like the first round is the most shocking thing, the most shocking bit of it, because there is really no building from Jan in that round.
Yeah.
He is just trying to take Sterling's head off.
Yeah.
Not even doing much of that, to be honest. He's not willing to commit to anything to, the opposite of what we were saying about Volkanovski. He's not willing to do anything to draw reactions out of Sterling. He's just, like, trying to guess what Sterling's going to do and killing him for it.
Yeah.
But one of the remarkable things is that, like, the tyranny of expectations of, that Jan was going to be crushing Sterling and Sterling was just, on borrowed time, that, like, it was, I guess it tends to in these things, but it was leaking through into the commentary and the way that people were viewing it. Like,
it affected me because I thought Jan won the first round.
Because I heard like some people gave Jan the first round, some complete morons gave Jan the first round while they were watching it. I was just like, what kind of absolute clown?
Kind of
just didn't know what they were doing. Would score the first. Okay, I'm done now.
What kind of a complete dunderhead will be watching this? Yeah, no, I absolutely was thinking, well, Sterling's in the back foot. I mean, they were relatively close in landed strikes. It's not like it was a wide round either way.
I wasn't really.
But in hindsight,
I do actually think it's still quite an easy round to score.
I actually agree in review. I totally agree. I went back and watched it and I was like, why did I think Jan won this round? Just because he was coming forward. He landed fewer strikes of a lower quality. I think he landed one good strike in the entire round, whereas Sterling landed several brutally clean body kicks, including the very first strike of the fight.
Quite a nice, like, elbow off the top of Jan's head,
too.
Yeah. And it reminded me of, Bert Melendez, Ben Henderson. Like, it's just like one guy's storming after the other guy the whole time, and he's just eating a sort of relatively steady diet of kicks.
Mm-hmm.
Like, when he gets near Henderson's like, rah! And then just, like, runs away. And it really, there's a really big, like, mental image of just, like, this one guy just running for it. Like, yeah, I think, like, Ndo is just damaging him quite a bit in that fight. Mm-hmm. And again, that wasn't the narrative of this fight because it was quickly just became, like, surprisingly enough, like, another weird dynamic of this fight is that so much of it was wrestling.
Yeah.
Like, Peter Yan, like, couldn't stop wrestling either.
Yeah,
like,
I think
his rounds were like control wrestling rounds without massive amounts of ground and pound.
Right. I think it was another sort of bit of like classic Peter Yan psychology that worked against him this time. That he clearly in the first fight he like takes delight in beating people in the thing they think they're good at. And here it was like DC insisting on getting that takedown against John Jones. He just like couldn't let it go until it started to work. And by that time, it wasn't enough to take over the fight. So yeah, I think really tremendous. The adjustments I spoke of, one of the major ones, Marcos D'Amata, the American top team coach in Petr Yan's corner, was clearly losing his fucking mind. He was immensely frustrated with Petr Yan. Every time he went back to the corner after the second round, he was, increasingly frantically shouting at him not to give his back. That was like the one thing he wanted Yan to do, was never to give his back. And the other side points of that instruction were to accept the clinches for what they were and then control the wrists. They said if you control his wrists, he can't change levels and he can't get around behind you. You have to control a wrist. And, I guess it essentially just one time of that. First of all, Yan failed that on his own merits in the first backpack round 2. He got that instruction and then couldn't listen to it in round 3. Once again, got hit with a takedown attempt and ended up giving up his back to try to escape. It wasn't until round 4, after, again, an increasingly frantic Marcos D'Amata was just yelling at him not to fight the wrists and not give his back, that he actually started to focus on that element of takedown defense and started to win the clinches as a result. But for Petr Yan, the king of adjustments, who I think is rightly lauded for just being exceptionally good at adjusting to what his opponents are doing, he was way behind in catching up to Sterling's tactics. And they were relatively simple things to catch up to. I mean, again, there wasn't a whole lot of depth to Aljamain Sterling's game plan. It was just, what am I good at? Basically the things I've been good at since day one. Flitting around and kicking and taking people's backs. That was the whole thing. Worked like a charm. I think
just focused on it with
yeah,
a high degree of precision. He still had the moments where he would exploit Jan's tendency to high guard by flurrying him a little bit and getting him to think about what was coming. As I said, that was really where the third round takedown came from. But it was he just stuck to his core approach, just with a massive amount of discipline. As I said, it's obviously stuff for him to work on again. He just can't have ends to fights look like that.
Yeah.
We mentioned before, it's very important not to have just rock solid rounds go against you.
Yeah.
And but one of the things was that every round in this fight was just super rock solid apart from the first one.
Yep. Yeah, 2 rock solid rounds apiece, and then in hindsight, a pretty clear first round, I think, for Sterling. Yeah, I think there's that both explores some of the limitations of Sterling, but you could also take it as a promising thing that this was an incredibly winning performance from him, and there's still room to grow in areas that as we sort of talked about before the first fight, areas I think he's more than capable of improving in. Like in that first round of striking, I wouldn't have hated to see a little more of Sterling's, boxing game. He could have absolutely been using his jab to get to some of those angles, and started exploiting Jan's high guard earlier. Gotten in more body shots with the hands in addition to the kicks. Again, he won the round without it, but he could win it better. And
also it would just allow him to able to survive rounds 4 and 5 more,
right?
If he's willing to, he can't just try and burn time with takedowns in the clinch late in the fight, because it's literally the most exhausting thing you can do in MMA is just shoot takedowns over and over again. In some ways, it was remarkable that he was, the Jan rounds towards the end weren't more dominant.
Yeah. Sterling's conditioning was incredible.
Hadn't exhausted himself.
He talked before this fight about just having not being in good enough shape and not being in the right headspace for the first fight, and it's easy to believe that now because he looked confident, and that I'm assuming plus a better strength and conditioning program this time around had him looking remarkably fresh after the game plan he stuck to, and even in the 5th round he didn't look exhausted. Jan himself didn't look particularly fresh, as he did not in the first fight. And yeah, on the same note, there were moments in the 4th and 5th rounds where, again, I think in a potential third fight between these two, there's room to grow. He, again, there were not enough moments of him using the threat of the takedown, which by that point Jan obviously had to put a ton of respect towards using that threat to get strikes in. There were a couple. Level change uppercuts, level change body shots.
Yeah, I was thinking he really just needs to lean more into that next time.
Yeah.
Should really just learn the biggest, most Jeremy Stevens-esque full body uppercut.
Yeah.
That he can, and then just throw it in the 4th round.
Right. I agree.
Once he's fake his whole, spamming takedowns thing. Again, and then just throw the biggest punch he can. I was thinking maybe he should try for a Dan Henderson overhand. I think there would actually be quite a risk that would bounce off Petr Yan's forehead, because his reaction when he sees a takedown coming is basically to throw his hips back and dip his chin, which is all pretty good textbook defense. He dips his chin and then tucks his hands. So there would be if he threw the Henderson overhand, there might be like a risk that he would just break his hand on Petillon's forehead.
But the uppercuts were there, and I also think there's room in a potential third fight for him to put more punches together behind those things. Like he could have used a little more confidence on the feet. Like there were opportunities. I think basically a blend of the success he had in the first fight and the success he had here. He could easily play all those first fight tactics off of the incredible grappling success he had in this fight, and just potentially keep Petr Yan out of the fight for 4 rounds.
This obviously, as we said at the beginning, there's obviously a lot of room for Petr Yan to improve on this as well. If this was an incredible performance from Sterling, it's mirrored by being a bad one from Yan.
Yeah, it's always a bit of both.
But it's remarkable that we're now thinking of this as like a super competitive rivalry. And in some ways, what we always would have wanted from this. Before it was just like Sterling kind of got fortunate and was on his way of getting punted out of their last fight. Now it's a genuinely like compelling puzzle solving thing between the two of them, and it's got much more of a sort of Reno Figueiredo feel where you're like, well, wow, really. It can be that whoever just executes better on the day is gonna win. Yeah.
It also means, Phil, potentially another title shot for Jose Aldo.
Does.
In a not unwinnable matchup against Aljamain Sterling, although I will say Jose Aldo's incredible takedown defense is not what it once was. Yeah. But what a notch on Aljamain Sterling's belt it would be to choke out Jose Aldo. I would like to see that. Although he called out TJ Dillashaw.
One of the other
I would like to see that
articles I had on the back burner, which was about, I've decided to save for it. I wrote it months ago, and for some reason I was like, I will write this article if Jose Aldo ever gets a title shot, even though he won't. And it was basically about how the essential thing was sort of around how MMA doesn't have a GOAT at the moment, not really, in the way that boxing does. Have people who have reached the tier of boxing GOATs. Because most of them did completely insane things, like completely unthinkable, stupid things that kept their careers going way longer than they should have. Then it worked out for them. We don't have... Boxing GOATs are not like Nurmagomedov or George St. Pierre, or they're not like Anderson Silva in that they continued way after they should have stopped, and then it worked. Yeah, it's what like people like Roberto Duran did. Right,
fighting up in weight, way past his prime. Famously, Duran beat the shit out of Iran Barkley after. His series with the Fab Four were done and still was incredible. But I think Jose Aldo, I mean, not to get into the dreaded pound for pound discussion, but that's exactly what I'm going to do. Forever, basically, I've maintained it's GSP. Absolutely. The best fighter of all time is GSP. Jose Aldo, I think he's my number one now, kind of for that reason. Because here we have him still in the midst of an unbelievably successful post-prime, post-championship career. And that kind of longevity, for me, means almost as much as a long title reign, which I consider to be like I think for obvious reasons, the height of achievement in combat sports is to just hold a title for ages.
My basic premise is that I think you can have. I think the main thing now is that there are several options which are largely debatable. Yeah. I think if Jose Aldo somehow won the bantamweight belt,
oh my god,
he would be in a new tier, which basically only boxers and people in other combat sports have actually ever achieved.
Right. It would make him a combat sports GOAT, not even just an MMA GOAT. He'd be up there with guys like Duran, 100%. But I think even now, Jose Aldo is my number one MMA pound for pound of all time. And it's not impossible that he gets a title shot here and beats Aljamain Sterling, assuming that Sterling gets that Dillashaw fight and wins. which is also a big question. We'll have to talk about that one. It's a very compelling fight that we'll.
It's the division remains incredibly exciting at almost every single level.
Yep. Bantamweight,
it's the one
baby.
division where it could be literally the only thing you watched.
Yes.
You would be insanely entertained.
Yes. All right. Well, credit to Aljamain Sterling, to current number 84 pound for pound Petr Yan. Better luck next time. And to Petr Yan's fans, it gets better. It will pass like all things, this pain, this suffering. And I guess become a Volkanovski stan. It's happier. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, I'm actually having a feeling now that we may just get to talk about Chimaev Burns, and then perhaps we can save anything else from this card, in addition to maybe a brief discussion of Muhammad versus Luque, for a Patreon bonus episode. No promises as of yet, but that sounds like a promising plan for the rest of the afternoon. At the very least, we'll be back with Chimaev versus Burns after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
Welcome back to Heavy Hands. On to the centerpiece, the so-called People's Main Event of the UFC 273 main card. That was Khamzat Chimaev versus Gilbert Burns. And thank fucking God, Phil, we have something to say about Khamzat Chimaev other than that he is one of the most dominant, incredible prospects we've ever seen. Which, by the way, just to counter a certain, not surprising, but still disappointing overreaction.
He used to be considered good, but now he's been exposed. I agree.
Yes, he's trash now. He's obviously trash.
He's trash. He is trash. Never would have happened to Khabib.
Some of the things we learned about Khamzat Chimaev are limitations, about which we had no idea before. Some of them are strengths, about which we had no idea before. The first and simplest of those, Khamzat Chimaev has a fucking chin. He has a serious chin. Now, that's not always the thing you want to find out about a prospect, but when you're finding it out for the first time against a top 5 opponent in what could very likely be a title eliminator, although now it seems like they're discussing Chimaev versus either Covington or Edwards, which would be hilarious and cruel to Leon, but also that's what I want to see, do that one. When you're finding it out for the first time at that stage, it's just a testament to how incredible the guy has been already up to that point. He's a 4-year pro who for the first time in his career was tested and still very clearly won against an extremely courageous and dangerous Gilbert Burns. So, not exposed, not a bad fighter, but I'm so relieved that I don't just have to sort of make completely hypothetical statements about what things Chimaev might struggle with. Some of the things I would have predicted already, about what happens, what kind of pushback troubles him, and how does he deal with it, were revealed in this fight. But it's nice to have a concrete example of ways in which he is not just a god walking the earth.
Yeah. So when the fight started and he just ran Burns into the fence, I was like, oh no.
Yeah.
Maybe he's just going to get him down, and then that's just going to be it.
Yep.
He's just going to crush him from the top position. But I think this was it was just a great fight. I think this was. I don't know. Maybe this wasn't Gilbert Burns' best technical performance.
No,
but it was 100% his gutsiest.
Oh yeah.
There was so many. I think, and this was a big part of why it was so competitive, is that, and I think this is a big part of sort of who Chimaev has quite understandably been, there were many points where Chimaev was just like, oh, he's going to break now. He's going to break now. And this is both baked into, I think, Chimaev's style from like a macro perspective within the fight, but also, it's baked into the way he throws strikes. Be lots of times where he'd just throw two massive punches, and he'd be like, everyone would be crumbling by this point.
Yep.
Burns is backed up against the cage, and then Burns would just leap out at him and crack him.
Yeah, and as far as I would have expected, Gilbert Burns should have been crumbling at that point.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. I've seen Gilbert Burns get broken before, but this time he just refused to. It was remarkably courageous.
Yeah, it was awesome. I want to first of all shout out how well Gilbert Burns dealt with the wrestling and grappling of Chimaev. As you said, it was a pretty typical Chimaev sequence right at the start. He backed Gilbert up to the fence. I think let me just refresh my memory with the footage here. Yeah, ended up in a clinch. Ended up in like an over-under clinch. Started messing about with the grips and then dropped for a double. Sort of half-dumped Gilbert, who ended up on a knee with a post, not fully taken down, but we have seen this from Chimaev so many times. Chimaev starts fighting for that cross wrist behind the back. He looks for some kind of wrist control, and then he takes Gilbert back over his weak angle, takes him over backwards. Gilbert ends up on his butt. It's a chain wrestling sequence that we've seen from Chimaev several times already. And, Gilbert just basically did the grappling version of what he did at every moment on the feet in this fight, was to just fight back in the craziest way possible, just to make sure that something was happening. He rolled through, tried to Granby roll out of a rear waist cinch, ended up on his back, but, was just there ready for essentially beckoning Chimaev into his guard, and Chimaev didn't want to play in Gilbert Burns' guard. And so he let him back up. That's one way to deal with Chimaev's wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
Dynamism. That was really what it was.
And also the point later on in the fight, the super badass point when he, shot for a takedown himself, and then Chimaev was just like, no, and just kind of pushed him over. He had to pull guard. He just hammer-fisted Chimaev a whole bunch, and then just booted him back into the fence and jumped up. Tremendous.
Chimaev not even realizing that there was anything, not even aware of the weakness in his own balance in that position, because he's like, no one ever does anything from here. And Gilbert Burns didn't push him over. He fucking sidekicked him in the chest and knocked him on his ass and got back up. That was awesome.
Yeah, this fight just in general was super awesome.
Awesome.
Yeah, so, I mean, some of the things to take away from Chimaev, anyone who thought that he was, when we predicted that he was going to crush Gilbert Burns, and again, well, much like the Yarn thing, we perhaps sort of oversold him a bit. But when we said that, I don't think we were necessarily being like, Khamzat Chimaev is a lethal striker. He's going to win this everywhere on the feet.
Yeah.
The main thing, at least I was thinking, is that he's a giant.
Yeah.
Is a giant chin bully who can strike pretty well, and will also just be able to crush Burns in the clinch and on the ground if he gets there. A lot of those things did sort of end up being true.
Mm-hmm.
I think that at least to some extent, people who were expecting him to not just be what is clearly quite a grappling savant, but to be an elite level striker, this was just insane. There is at least enough footage of him out there to know that that's not the case.
Yeah, he's a very dangerous striker. He's undeniably a very dangerous striker, a potent one.
Yeah.
But if you're Gilbert Burns and you just sort of you spend a lot of these exchanges just covering up and holding your ground and waiting for your moment to fire back, Chimaev gives you plenty of them. Which I think we could have and should have predicted coming in here, that Burns is just going to shell up, and then Chimaev is going to have committed himself to a close range, at some point run out of steam on his punches, and just be kind of standing there and not really have any head movement, not have not having a great deal of footwork to get himself off in a safe direction, and just get hit back, which he did many times.
But also, like, I think Chimaev is a pretty good striker, like, for what he is. You know, he's a 4-year pro fighting in, you know, I don't know whether you know, the fact that he was fighting during Ramadan changes any dynamics about this. I don't think it probably does, but who knows?
Could be.
But he, you know, keeps his stance. He throws nice straight shots. He's got a good instinct. He's actually pretty accurate.
Yep.
He does throw, and he's clearly got good instincts. He's just pretty raw.
And he makes adjustments
more
too.
Than that. But more than that, he has the insane durability and physical strength to carry him through that kind of engagement. That right hand that Burns caught him with in the second round, was it?
Yes, right towards the last 20 seconds of the second round.
There aren't. That is a KO shot on almost everyone.
Yeah.
Don't think it even knocked him down.
Yeah, it just unsteadied his legs for a cuffing second shot to knock him off balance. It was every element of that is like, it knocks everyone else out. You're winding up on an uppercut. You're both lurching forward and lifting up your base as an overhand right catches you perfectly on the chin.
Mm-hmm.
That's a knockout. And instead, he just sort of staggeringly regains his balance, continues trying to throw, by the way, because that's the kind of confidence he understandably brings into his fights, and which helped him here. You know, like, one thing I might have expected is that Chimaev, being so unused to any kind of pushback, when he gets it, his confidence might crumble a bit. It didn't. Not for a second did he question that he could still win this fight when things started to go a bit pear-shaped, as you folks say. Continue to try following up with strikes into the clinch, and then it was like a missed right hand that caught him like forearm on the side of the neck, which actually knocked him down. And then Chimaev came out in the third round and just seemed to be a little more insistent on keeping his distance, using his jab, trying to line up the uppercut, a good read, something he actually picked up on pretty early in the fight, but a lot of the earlier ones were super gung-ho, where he was thinking the uppercut's going to destroy him, and if that doesn't do it, then the left hook coming after is going to. A few of those attempts got countered early. Later on, it was a little more careful and methodical, using the jab to set up that uppercut and not just falling into the pocket after it. And I thought for the huge gulf between what he experienced in this fight as opposed to every other fight of his career, he dealt with the pressure remarkably well and just kind of stayed in the driver's seat as best he could. It helped that Gilbert...
I mean, there's... everyone has this point, I think. Every fighter I can think of has been, good or great, has had this point where it just suddenly someone is just much tougher than they expect.
Yeah.
And they're suddenly struggling much more than you would expect them to. And the thing with Chimaev is that it's essentially happened earlier in his career and against a very high level of competition.
Yeah.
Khabib Nurmagomedov had it against Gleison Tibau. Regardless of whether you think Tibau won that fight or not, it's easily Khabib's worst performance.
Yep.
That he just wasn't ready for someone that he couldn't. He still, pretty much, technically gutted out a win, but he looked uncomfortable and ragged the whole time. Like John Jones had his fight against Stephan Bonner,
right?
Where he was just, tossing him around the cage for 2 rounds, and then he was like, "This guy's still here?
Mm-hmm.
Hell." So yeah, the idea that like this is some kind of indictment where you're like, oh yeah, this 4-year pro basically won a kickboxing match with Gilbert Burns on his best day is some major indictment of him, and still less so in this particular division.
Yeah,
because I mean, like, what are people thinking that like Colby Covington is some kind of defensive mastermind? Like,
right.
The criticism of Chimaev is that he like leans on his durability and his physical traits too much, and he's defensively no great shakes. This is like that. That kind of sounds like you're just describing top welterweights anyway.
Yeah.
Certainly not a disqualifying factor.
And also in a fight this crazy, he showed, despite, I think, having to hit like a second and then a third wind, great conditioning and staying power in addition to the durability.
Yeah, I mean, that was something that I think we could definitely, unless it was one of those things where he really did have a confidence and adrenaline dump.
Yeah.
That was one of the things that's coming out of the camp where they're just like, yeah, this guy can just go forever. He has an insane gas tank.
But again, another weapon against a guy like Covington.
Yeah, and I would expect that, like, again, I think there's until, and as I said, I think he is also at risk of like a significant decline down the road because he trains too hard. I think there is a very solid chance that this is actually this might be like one of the worst. This might be like some of the worst we actually see his gas tank looking.
Right.
In like the near future.
Could be. First time it's happened.
Because this is the first time he's had a fight like this, and he will know what it's like next time.
Yeah. Now he's prepared for it. But again, man, huge credit to Gilbert Burns. He made a lot happen.
Oh yeah.
He made a lot happen with the counter punching. He was just like dead tired through the entirety of the third round because it was just bonkers war the entire time up to that point. I was screaming for him to put 2 punches together.
Yeah.
I think honestly, we could have been talking about Gilbert Burns as a winner if he had just taken a little bit of steam off his shots and put a left hand behind or before that right hook, a left hook before or behind that right hand and continued mixing that up. On the few occasions he did put 2 punches together, one of them would land very clean. And in fact, there was a moment right near the end of the third round where he almost clattered Chimaev. I think he landed a big counter right hand, or maybe it was like a left hook right hand, one of the few combinations in that round that just landed clean and put Chimaev on the back foot for a moment.
Yeah, I mean, that was the thing, is that, like, despite the perceived and probably in some ways actual disparities between like the cardio of these guys, like Burns was actually coming on pretty strong towards the second half of that third round.
Yeah.
And again, this is fully expectable, and what you would, it's just what you'd kind of expect from someone in Chimaev's position. It happens to literally everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, Gilbert Burns. It's a fucking badass. Like
100%.
He took the fight. How many places down was he fighting? Chimaev wasn't even ranked top 10, was he?
I don't think he was. He hadn't fought anyone that could have earned him a ranking.
Yeah, and Burns was ranked number 2. He, like, everyone said that he was this horrific matchup. He was just much too big, much too powerful. Then Burns just goes out there and has one of the best fights we've seen in some ways for like sheer pronounced activity. It's just sheer violence. I think someone said this on the internet. It was like Gaethje Chandler, but it maintained its level of pace for the entire thing,
for the entire fight. Yeah, he was.
It was much more. It was much more back and forth the way to the end.
Yeah, agreed. Chimaev was ranked 11th. And
that's what I thought.
He is now number 3 with Burns at 4. Edwards is now up at 2. That feels like the very least you could do for Gilbert Burns after this, because we already knew, just based on dominance and talent and breadth of skill, that Chimaev was just a fighter waiting for his top 5 ranking. And this was way better than we expected from Gilbert Burns. So sitting right below Chimaev, holding on to that top 5 spot feels more than justified for this performance from Burns.
Good guy from Team Evil.
Yep.
The
gentle
does
kid.
His best bit does his bit to save the welterweight division.
That's another good point. The only guy, he's the only guy fighting anyone, and he is fighting anyone. Bravo, Gilbert Burns. Truly a hero of the welterweight division and the hero of Team Evil. All right. Well, that will do it for this week's Heavy Hands. Thank you all so much for listening. If you want to hear our discussion of not only the UFC 273 undercard, basically covering everything of interest from Dern Torres down, in addition to a nice and I think interesting discussion of next week's main event, Bilal Muhammad versus Vicente Luque 2. Make sure you head over to the Heavy Hands Patreon. It's $3 a month to get access to all our bonus episodes, and this one is a reasonably lengthy one that I hope you guys will enjoy. Next week we'll be back. If anything interesting does happen on the Muhammad Luque 2 card, we will talk about it in addition to, what is it, Font versus Vera? Yeah?
Wait a minute. One more thing.
Uh-huh.
Is it not McKee versus Pitbull 2?
Oh, yeah. Well, we're going to have to talk about that next week.
Yeah. I mean, I think basically, just to get my take out of the way for that one, I think Pitbull is probably still better fighter, but it's just not a dynamic that tends to favor the much, much older guy in these situations.
Yeah, much older, much smaller.
Much older, much smaller. Once someone gets that kind of surge of confidence at that kind of level, it's just hard to bring it back. So I am expecting McKee to win. I'm not sure how, because he's still just a kind of a messy, weird dude. But yeah, should actually be a really good one.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with that prediction, and I will say that I think it's the kind of fight, because of that, like, quick and dirty breakdown or pre-fight discussion, that will hopefully just be more interesting to talk about anyway after the fact. So, provided that something interesting happens, we will definitely make sure to mention that in addition to the UFC cards bookending next week's episode. And hopefully something really interesting happens and we can devote like an actual segment to it. But at the very least, we will discuss it and mention it if it's another quick and violent finish. Again, check out the Patreon bonus episode, $3. You can afford it. You like us. That's it. We'll talk to you guys next week. Oh, wait. Twitter, Phil. Twitter. You can find Phil on Twitter, where every week you can find him waiting until Monday afternoon to discuss that weekend's UFC card. That's at Evil Greg Jackson. You can find me frequently discussing the fights as they're actually happening, because I care about you, I'm devoted, I'm disciplined, I'm not a man-child who instead of going out on dates with his girlfriend watches UFC cards on Saturday night. You can find me at Boxing Bush, B-U-S-C-H. And until next week's episode, when we hope you will join us again, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.